Can we move forward from the front? Thank you so much. Please, we can just take a minute to quickly do that. Thank you. All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Blessing Afolabi, and I would like to welcome you to the 106th edition of the Power Dialogue. And this evening, as always, we'll be discussing a very crucial topic, focus on two landmark frameworks, which is the National Integrated Resource Plan and the National Integrated Electricity Policy and Strategic Implementation Plan. These frameworks is focused on building a resilient, inclusive, and investor-friendly power sector. Our experts are ready to give us more insights into this topic this evening, and I'll be inviting them on stage right away. First is the Chief Technical Advisor to the Minister of Power. Please, with a round of applause, let us welcome Mr. Adedayo Olowoni. I think we can do better, really. Thank you so much. Joining him on stage. Thank you. Joining him on stage is the team lead at UK NIEP. Please, with a resounding round of applause, let's welcome Mr. Frank Edozie. Thank you. Okay. Also on the panel this evening is the head of gas business at Tata Power Utility Limited. Please let us welcome Mr. Ezuma Okoronkwo. Okay. And we have only one woman standing this evening, and she'll be our moderator for the session. Please, I want us to do a very, very loud ovation for her. She is Annie Nkem Nene. She's a legal consultant and next year associate. Please, let's welcome her. Thank you so much. Please, if you have any questions, you can just meet anyone at the registration table. Please sit back. This evening is going to be very insightful because we have the big men and women on the panel. Thank you so much and enjoy the conversation. Over to you, our moderator. Thank you.
Good evening, distinguished panelists. Good evening, audience. You are welcome to the 106th edition of Power Dialogue, and we thank you for being here. The topic of today's discussion is Power in Pages, the future outlook of NIRP and NIEP-SIP. I know the question in the minds of many people are, what are these acronyms? So NIRP stands for Nigeria Integrated Resource Plan, and NIEP-SIP stands for National Integrated Electricity Policy and Strategic Implementation Plan. Please, can you give me a hand of applause, because this acronym is not easy. So we have 5 major objectives tonight. The first is that at the end of this session, we expect each and every one of us to know what exactly is an integrated resource plan and what are the contents of the National Electricity Policy. The second objective tonight would be for us to know the implementation plan contained in these frameworks, because from 2001 to date, we have over 10 frameworks, policies, action plans on energy. And it's said that the problem with Nigeria is not law or policy, but the problem is with the implementation. So we'll delve into this framework and see if it has robust implementation plans. Another objective we'll look at tonight will be the role of our stakeholders. What are the roles of stakeholders when it comes to implementing these policies? Who is supposed to do what and when? The next objective will be to look at the strategies involved in these instruments. What strategies do we need to achieve Nigeria's electricity goals. You know that policy in itself would not add 1 megawatt to the grid. So what do we need to add megawatt to the grid? So we'll look at the policy, we'll look at the strategies included in these frameworks. And finally, we'll be looking at the challenges and the constraints that these frameworks present. So before we move forward, I would urge the audience to please put off your phones or at least put it in silent so we don't get distracted. And in the course of the discussion, we would be taking questions. So prepare your questions. And I would also extend this to the audience online. So please send in your questions and our distinguished panelists would respond to them in due course. So, ladies and gentlemen, we promise you that tonight's discourse will be very insightful and educating. So, sit back, buckle your shoes, and fasten your seatbelts, and let's dive right into the topic. So, to my panelists, thank you so much and welcome once again. Please give our panelists a hand of applause. So, Dio, I would start with you. You're the representative of the government here. And the audience and myself would want to know what exactly is an integrated resource plan? And what are the contents of this almighty electricity policy that we all are here to know about? Over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Inkem. So in terms of an IRP is an integrated resource plan. Really, it's a document that allows end-to-end planning. So one of the key things in the IRP is a focus on least cost generation to ensure that you actually have generation at an affordable price. And the most important thing about the IRP is that it allows for proper planning. One of the things that when I look at the sector today and the generation you have in Nigeria, sometimes you feel it's very, very haphazard. And you think about all the additional assets required to actually deliver electricity to homes. And you see some of our generating plants, when you look at them, they lack ability to evacuate. And then you ask yourself, if this was properly planned, shouldn't there have been a planned transmission line in this axis that is capable of evacuating this energy? And while you are planning that, where exactly is the energy going to be delivered? And I think that that's one of the importance of an integrated resource plan. It allows you to look at your level of energy mix, what type of energy you want to bring onto the grid, or even in a captive way or on a state level that is embedded. It also allows you to plan for the last mile, to understand exactly how you're going to evacuate and where you're going to deliver this power. I think one of the things that I'll give credit to Frank and his team is that the IRP was actually started before we came into government. And one of the things that I had to do as a chief technical advisor was to evaluate the document, the program, where it was, the software. And I was very much convinced about the direction in which the IRP was going and the content of it. And it was very, very aligned to my thought as well. Because in a lot of countries today, you start to have IRPs, right? Because it's actually a master plan that allows you to look at a full overview of your energy value chain to understand where you want generation, how you want your transmission to be, and how you want to develop your last mile. It's very, very critical that now we transfer that document to the subnationals. What we do not want as we go into a subnational market is for it to develop the way the national market developed over the last 50, 60 years, where sometimes there is no clear planning in terms of generation, transmission, and distribution. And at a state level, we want to see IRPs as well that show a least cost generation where this energy is going to be distributed to, as most generation at state level will potentially be at 33 kV. Some of them might be at 132 kV, but it's just very critical to have that clear plan on what you want to do with the energy and how you want to actually deliver it to the last mile. And then in terms of the NIEP-SIP, I know that there are so many acronyms, right? So, you just have to, there are even a lot more acronyms, right? When you also deal with the multinationals. But in terms of the National Integrated Electricity Policy, I think it was a critical document. First of all, it's a fundamental document that was required by the Electricity Act of 2023, that the process of developing the policy must start from the signing, 1 year from the signing of the document. So one of the things that we did immediately we got into government was to kickstart the process. The key question about stakeholders. Critical part of the electricity segment. Because consumers of electricity, producers of electricity, suppliers of electricity, there's a significant distrust. And I think the chain, what you as a consumer need to do to ensure the electricity sector, what you as a supplier of energy needs to do to ensure a successful electricity value chain. And I think stakeholders are actually quite viable. So one of the first things we did was really engage with stakeholders. We had more than 3 or 4 public engagements with stakeholders before, during, and in the process of drafting the policy. I think one of the key things I'll take out of the policy is a final admission that government cannot drive the electricity sector alone. I think one of the things that comes out very strongly is the need of involvement of the private sector to ensure that we can catalyze private sector investment to actually drive the investment we need to deliver 100% access to Nigerians. 100% access, energy access to Nigerians cannot and will not be delivered by government alone. And what government must do is to create the enabling environment to allow private sector to thrive. So that's one of the key things that comes out of the policy that is very, very clear, that we need to catalyze significant private sector investment to actually allow us to deliver reliable, stable, and affordable electricity to Nigerians.
Thank you so much. As a follow-up question, what are the implementation timelines for both instruments? What critical milestones have been achieved so far? And do you have any delays so far?
Okay, I'll start with the IRP. I think the IRP in itself already has an implementation plan. I think there have been some delays in terms of the IRP due to being able to provide system planning on the transmission segment to understand how the transmission network would look down the line, how we want it to look in the future. So we still have to provide that update into the IRP. But the version of the IRP that is currently here is available, it's gone live, right? Which means that it will be used as a process, it will be used as a document that would help us drive energy value chain planning in the country. So we plan to house this resource within NERC and within the independent system operator, NISO, because one of the things that the system operator must do is really planning. You want to have a new generation plant. The system operator needs to know where this is going to be. The system planning in NISO also needs to understand what type of infrastructure is going to be required for the evacuation, what kind of connection with distribution network has to be built to actually ensure energy delivery. Because one of the key challenges that we have seen is that you can generate as much energy and you can even transmit as much energy as you can. But when you hit a bottleneck on your injection substation, where maybe you have only 5 feeders and you have a 150 MVA transformer, but you are bringing in 250 megawatts. I can already assure you that out of that 250 megawatts, maybe you can deliver 100, 120, and then the rest, it's energy, right? So if you are not continuously moving it along, you see a lot of transformers that are put on soak, and this adds overall to the losses that we see in the system. So again, the reason why I'm mentioning this is that the system is live and we need to use it for planning to ensure that generation capacity is matched by available transmission, and this is also matched by investment in infrastructure in the downstream to deliver energy to households. In terms of the policy, I think the policy has taken much longer than we anticipated. We started in December 2023, and we only just got approval in April 2025. Our expectation was to have completed this by December 2024, which we did. But then, in getting FEC approval, there was a bit of discussions back and forth. But eventually, we did get approval. We are now moving into the strategic implementation plan. And that was the discussion we had. Do you want to just go ahead and draft the document, the policy, and the implementation plan right at the same time? Or do you want to draft the document, the policy that is approved, that stakeholders agree with, and then together with some of these stakeholders, we then draft the implementation plan? Buy-in is probably one of the most critical steps we need to take in this sector today. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of distrust, there's a lot of lack of understanding as well. So for me, the most important thing today is not ability for technical I think first of all, we need electricity value chain. Once there's misalignment on legal structures, there is a full misalignment on electrons. And that's what you see in Nigeria. Significant misalignment in the entire energy value chain. And that continues to drive a limited supply of it. And if we're really going to improve the sector, we have to really look at
sector goals, and how do you project the SIP, the SIP and the NIRP and the electricity policy in the coming years?
Yeah. So who's asleep? That hasn't woken up. Okay, I'll come to your question, but let me just test something. Who in the room has not seen either the NIEP or the NIRP? Who has not? You're very coy in raising your hand. Okay. All right. Just about half. Means half I've seen. That is encouraging. And I would suggest that everybody here is entitled to access to that document. And could I ask, with your permission, Dio, that the Secretariat make sure that people are provided with the QR codes to access these documents?
Absolutely.
In your back communication to them.
Absolutely.
One, that you can be informed. Two, that you can disagree. And three, that you can do something about it. Now, having said that, if we don't change the way that we do things, how people say it? It's only a madman that acts in the same way repeatedly and then expects different outcomes. We have to change. And those, for me, were one of the driving reasons. We worked at the integrated resource plan for 3.5 years across 2 ministers and finished with a third, and a lot of tears and sorrows. But if we didn't work at it and put it there, I did not see a mechanism that allowed us to have robust arguments with political actors that have been, in many ways, with their good intentions, but their actions have been the nemesis, part of the nemesis of the power sector. Here are a few examples talking about experience. What is the rationale in putting a 500 MVA transformer at the end of a transmission network that has no consumers to take power from it, that doesn't have the line strength, the grid strength to deliver power to it, and doesn't even have the power from anywhere to power it? Other than somebody thinking that doing something to attract political attention, maybe the governor's village is at the end of the line, so you go and put a 500 MVA transformer there, everybody comes there and claps, and in the meantime, what you've done is encumbered the system with a transformer that will carry no load, cannot pay its way, and is denying consumers elsewhere who need the services, access to those services. If we had an IRP that people followed, stupidity like this, which is what I call it, could never happen, or at least they would be challenged. So it's changing the way we approach delivery, energy access, to one that is based on plans, to one that is driven by least cost considerations. Because at the end of the day, the cost of the power that is delivered is paid by you and I. And you also, one of the reasons you plan is knowing the way life goes. Not everything goes according to plan. But when things drop from the plan, everybody is made aware and something can be done to change it. That is why it is important to create this platform. It is not a static document. The version that we have delivered, that we're working with now, we've labeled it NIRP 2024. As soon as the Transmission Company of Nigeria has come up with the transmission expansion plan, that NIRP 2024 is due for an update. We are hoping that will happen this year. In answer to the question earlier, Dio said that we are creating a program management office. That program management office exists today, housed in NERC will eventually end up with NISO, peopled by people from both NERC and NISO that are undergoing training on managing the IRP environment. It is a living document. And therefore, the importance for everybody that is involved in the sector to make as much use of that plan and be proactive in identifying where there are shortfalls, shortcomings, or opportunities for improvement. The other value that an NIRP brings to any environment, as Dio also alluded to earlier, the job of providing reliable and cost-effective, least cost energy access is beyond any government. And it is even more of a challenge in a country as vast as Nigeria. What we need, some of which will come from the NIRP, is an encouragement to private investors or people that will broker entry by private investors to address certain segments of the network. From an investment point of view, they put money in, and over 25 years, 30 years, they get the returns on their capital and make some profit. These are things that we have to do to change what has been the pattern until now.
Thank you, Frank. Just for clarity, the electricity policy, how is it referred? Is it 2024 or 2025?
No, the policy itself, electricity policy, is just a policy. For reference, the last policy in the power sector was in year 2000. That's 25 years ago. So the policy has long-term horizon. So this should be there, hopefully for a number of years, 5, 10 years, and it will be due for a refresh. Not as long as 25 years, I hope.
No, just to add to that. So as part of the requirement of the EA Act, the integrated electricity policy must be updated every 5 years. So I think that that's one definite advantage that is structured as a law, that would actually allow us not to fall into the same situation we had with the last policy that has been in place for 25 years, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you very much. Just for the benefit of the audience, if you intend to access the Integrated Resource Plan, it's available on the Electricity Hub website and is also available on UK NIRP website. Thank you. So Ezuma, now to you. From the investment standpoint, what are the enablers and constraints affecting the future outlook of these two instruments?
Okay, thank you very much. With regards to the enablers, I think we're in the right direction as per a clear policy signal. Currently, we have the NIRP and the NIEP-SIP, which give us a clear and planned outlook on how the power sector is currently and what needs to be done to ensure that everyone has energy access. It also has outlined and clear objectives and goals that it seeks to achieve. For instance, we have the 36% renewable energy integration by 2030. And so things like this give investors confidence that there are clear and achievable objectives that have been set. And so the clear policy signal is one aspect, I think, that enables these the future outlook of NIRP as well as NIEP-SIP. Secondly, I would also just like to touch on the renewable energy potential in Nigeria. I mean, we're blessed with natural resources. We have enough sunlight. If you go to hydro, we also have opportunities there. And so these are some segments based on what the NIRP and NIEP-SIP say that we could leverage on and tap into and build on. And then we also have to look at the introduction of decentralized and digitized solutions that over time has been brought into the power sector. We are now talking about smart grids, and there's promotion of the mini grids, as well as the Electricity Act that allows for states to develop their own power sector policies in line with NERC guidelines, of course. But then these are things that I believe are enablers to the outlook and the performance of NIEP-SIP, basically. And then for the constraints, I would go with one that Dayo had just mentioned. We have, and you also had said, we know in Nigeria that coming up with the right policies have never been the issues, but we have an implementation problem. Dayo had mentioned earlier that just to get approval, it took longer than what was expected. And so that is a huge constraint that dissuades investors when they are not confident in the will or the ability of the regulators and stakeholders to implement and execute set policies. It becomes a challenge. Another key constraint will be, of course, the infrastructure and transmission bottlenecks. Right now, we have an installed capacity of about 13,000 megawatts, and we're only able to get over 4,000 to the end users, and leads to waste. And so that's also another issue. We need to look at upgrading the grid and promote decentralized grids, a lot of mini grids across regions. And so that's something that we need to address. It's expensive to upgrade the grid infrastructure and to even set up maybe grids at subnational levels. And so I believe if we can come up with a phased approach to achieve this grid expansion, which the NIEP-SIP addresses, I believe that constraints will be addressed. And we also have the financial and economic risk. Right now, I think the power sector has a debt of over 4 trillion naira. And I think half of that is from legacy debts, and then maybe the other half is from just last year's consumption from the government. And then we also have the collection challenges with the discos. I think they were not able to, I think they lost about 71.5 billion naira in collection just recently. And things like this scare away investors, because the most important thing for an investor, it's return on investment, unless of course it's an impact. And even with an impact investor, their return has to be the lives that it touches. So that's the most important thing. So when the financials are not in place, it becomes an issue. And we have the, I think, most popular one, the cost reflective tariff. We are still yet to implement that. The government still pays subsidy on electricity. So in as much as we have developed all of these wonderful policies and regulations, we are yet to fully implement. And so I know everyone here, those on band A, they already have issues. We are not getting up to 20 hours of electricity, and we still have to pay this amount. But the truth of the matter is that the tariffs that we are being charged right now are not cost reflective. And I think that's something that we need to look into. And so these are the constraints we face now for the future outlook of NIEP-SIP. And they must be addressed. If they are not addressed, I don't think we would we should expect the much needed investments we need to ensure electricity access to all Nigerians. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that detailed response. Frank, I'm circling back to you. There's a provision for National Integrated Resource Plan. And also on the state level, there's also a provision for each state to develop their own integrated resource plan. How would they reconcile both documents? Are there provisions for that? Is there a framework where the states can reconcile both frameworks?
Okay, it's actually not about reconciliation. It's about coexistence. So what we have done in the design and implementation of the National Nigeria Integrated Resource Plan is to make provisions for subnationals, states, to extract from the national IRP aspects that pertain to the geography of the state, apply the policies and directions of the state to that data, to upgrade it, to suit the particular requirements of the state electricity market. And they also have the ability to push that data back to the national IRP environment so that at any one time, the national IRP is a collective view of the entire country. That is the approach we've taken. The design is there. It is being architected to be implemented. There is a small issue of what the platform will be that is being addressed. We will get a chance with one of the early adopters of the state electricity market to trial this approach, and of course modify it as we go. But that thinking is there. It will be a shame if any one state had their own story or view of the world that is completely divorced from the national. It's also a shame at the national level if the view of one state or a number of states is missing. And one of the reasons all of this is important is we are a country for a reason. And we can only optimize really at the level of a country. If you've looked at the NIRP, there is a recommendation to segment the national grid into 4 zones, zones 1 to 4, comprising a number of discos and also dependent on the nature of energy, primary energy source that is there. When that is implemented, it becomes a lot easier to optimize for the states that are within any of the zones to get cheaper power, hopefully, from the subgrid that is within their zone. Yeah, so these are some of the reasons that are there. But the good news is the challenge is recognized and a technical, at least architectural solution is in place to arrive at the solution.
Okay. Thank you very much. Please, a round of applause for our panelists. So far, our panelists have done justice to the meaning of the IRP and the states, or rather the National Electricity Policy. And they've also talked about the implementation status of these frameworks. Now we move forward to the key stakeholders. What are the roles of these key stakeholders? What are they supposed to do and when? So Gaio, the next question goes to you. Mission 300 represents an ambitious target. What metrics and key performance indicators are there in the frameworks to track progress?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chineka. Yeah, so M300 is quite an ambitious program sponsored by the Africa Development Bank and the World Bank to electrify 300 million Africans, out of which we expect 50 to 75 million to come out of Nigeria. And we're trying to be ambitious to push for provision of access to 75 million Nigerians. In terms of how we want to implement M300. So in the M300, I actually presented the compact in Tanzania for Nigeria. And it's a compact that is built on 5 pillars. And to be honest, the focus, of course, there's the infrastructure aspect of the compact, which focuses on the last mile, which also focuses on transmission. But one of the key parts of Mission 300 actually focuses on sustainable viability of utilities. And I think it's one of the areas that we've actually seen. And when you'll be surprised that when you evaluate utilities in Africa, apart from one or two, maybe Senelec in Senegal, 95% of them are not sustainable. And you ask yourself, why? Why do we have this issue across a lot of African countries in terms of the viability of utilities? And a lot of it comes down to what Zuma mentioned earlier, is that in Africa, African governments have tried to control tariffs without necessarily focusing on how they ensure targeted subsidy to those individuals that actually require them in a country. For example, the Nigerian subsidy is so open-ended, and it actually makes me, I was going to say laugh, but it actually makes me cry, because when I look at the subsidy allocation every month, you actually see that the highest consumers of subsidy in Nigeria are actually those that can pay for electricity. And those that are lower consumers of energy don't actually get any electricity and are not consuming energy. So they are not actually consuming the subsidy. There is no country that can sustain a subsidy that is paid for the highest consumers of electricity. That word, subsidy, and highest consumer doesn't work together. So those are some of the things that we want to look at in the pillars. And I think one of the final areas that we've also focused on in the pillars is in terms of capacity development. That's also one of the pillars, because we've also seen that it's quite critical to ensure that we continue to train and develop capacity in the electricity sector in Nigeria. If you go back to those who are running utilities today, it's very weird. You will go back to always ex NEPA, ex PHCN. You are starting to see a little bit of a crop of new utility heads that haven't come from the old utilities. But that also means that there's some type of capacity gap that we see in the sector. And it's also important that we use M300 to try to address this. We then have what we call a coordination monitoring unit that is going to be set across all compacts in all countries. The CDMU is being led by the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Power. And within those two ministries, we're going to have a CDMU, which will be led by my team and a team from Ministry of Finance. And we're actually going to start our first engagement in July with some stakeholder engagement, where we need to start looking technical sessions on the pillars in the M300 and actually what we should be focusing on achieving. It's very easy. I could sit down in the ministry with the team and actually define what I believe should be the outcome. But it's actually not about me as an individual. It's actually about what the country achieves. And the more stakeholders we get involved in the plan would allow there to be a continuity beyond administration. And that's always some of the challenges that I've seen just coming into government, that you start a program and potentially a new administration comes and then they say, no, we don't want to continue with our program. That's one of the things that I wanted to most avoid with the IRP, because when we came in, the IRP was already 2 years in the making. It would have been very easy to say, we do not buy into the IRP and we insist on starting again. If that was the position, that would have been the position. But I think it's very, very good to think beyond personalities and think about the future of the country and the future of the energy value chain. So that's why it's very important for me to ensure that stakeholders are involved, that today may not be in government, but tomorrow may be in government, that are currently in the private sector, that would have to support us in actually driving this program. And that's the only way to sustainability. So from a government point of view, we will take the lead. We will create the enabling environment. And one of the things that is critical for us is to attract development partners, TFIs, multilaterals, private sector practitioners into the M300 to help us define what we should actually achieve from these pillars. I think that is what gives it sustainability from my perspective.
Thank you very much. As a follow-up question, in terms of implementation, which institution do you think might be the weakest link?
Well, this is not Chatham House rule, so of course I am not going to answer that question. But what I'll say is that institutional capacity is key. And in a lot of the work that we've done with the development partners is to really think about how do we develop those people that are truly working in the ministry. For example, I will come and I will go, right? The ministry is going to remain. It's very, very critical that we focus on that capacity development to ensure that all these types of programs from the IRP, from the NIEP, from M300 is actually able to be sustained by the ministries where they are domiciled and by the agencies that would then be implementing agencies for each pillar that will be working with the private sector. When you don't have the right capacity and the right level of development, then what often happens is that the private sector is unable to perform its duties in the way it should. And then they often take the lead in areas where they should not take the lead. Where you are supposed to give policy guidance, you would see certain private sector just going in their own direction. And then that often down the road creates a misalignment. So that is why it's absolutely necessary that it's institutional development is critical to actually allow this kind of programs to be sustained.
Thank you very much for that response. So to you, Ezuma, in your experience, what role has institutional investment played in translating policy and initiatives such as Mission 300 into bankable projects?
Okay, thank you. And I think Dario has sort of answered the question in the sense that we have received over time support technically and also earmarked funding for specific power projects. For instance, the UK NIEP supports in developing the NIEP-SIP are some of the ways in which institutional investments supports policy formulation, development, and execution. And also with capacity building, technical assistance. You see, Frank had mentioned that there is an office domiciled in NIRP where they are training a team that would be responsible for the monitoring and evaluation of the NIEP-SIP as well as the NIRP. And so the institutional investments provides that funding that is able to that enables us to hire or engage experts who provide capacity building for the relevant staff within the agencies. Also, there are some specific fundings that institutions like the AFDB and the World Bank have earmarked for a number of infrastructure projects within the power sector. And so these are some of the ways these fundings now could be disbursed in different ways. It could be through risk guarantees and blended finance to enable developers access funding from private sector, because as we all know, the loan requirements in Nigeria from the private sector are really stringent. And so these institutions come in and provide maybe softer loans that would be used or can be used to access the funding. And they also provide risk guarantees for loans that are taken. And so these are some of the ways in which institutional investment helps to develop, monitor, and execute policies. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that in-depth response. Now, the next question goes to Frank. Based on UK NIRP's work in Nigeria, where do you see the most significant gaps in institutional capacity that may likely impede the translation of policy framework into actionable goals?
Yeah. The first answer that I will give is a lot of the challenges we have to do with the absence of institutional capacity to do things. I think many people in this room would remember that in 2016, NBET executed power purchase agreements with 14 solar IPPs for, can't remember how many gigawatts of solar energy to be provided. I think the projects are all dead now, and not one was realized. And if you look into why that was so, there were issues with money, there were issues with guarantees, etc., etc. But there were also issues in the mines, because there was nobody you spoke to in TCN that could agree to put in 1 watt of solar energy on the grid, because the grid was unstable. And that thinking persists till date. So one of the things that we do in UK NIRP is in interactions, you theorize about all of these things and you look for solutions. Next week, a team of 6 people from the new independent system operator will be paying a visit to Egypt. Why Egypt? Whilst we spent all of this time saying no and refusing any of these things, Egypt added upwards of 40 gigawatts of solar energy to the grid. So we have an opportunity to learn how they see things differently and how they do things differently. And that's only the beginning. There are so many other things. Data. One of our first interventions was with NIRP, and we helped them, I would say, recognize the importance of using data to address the perceived incompetencies of discos. Anybody from a disco here? Yeah, there's somebody. So perhaps there is somewhere an agreement in the statement that discos were hiding their inefficiencies, perhaps not entirely pure intents in the absence of data or the inability of the regulator to actually understand what was going on through data. Most of the discos only showed to NIRP what they believed NIRP would want to see, that did not put the discos in the spotlight. But as soon as NIRP started seeing data of delivery of power to consumers, as approximated as we could make it, because many people still do not have meters. But there are other ways you can measure power that goes into different districts. And that's what we worked with. So today, NIRP has a tool that allows them to have real-time access to data that is delivered down to the distribution transformer level. So when consumers are charged above the value of power that was delivered to them, NIRP knows. And there are instances where people have been sanctioned for doing that. Again, is an aspect of institutional capacity, being able to look at data, analyze the data, and see trends, understand what is happening, and take action. And I would think that the more people are looking at using data to drive decision-making, using data to dissuade malintent in practices, the quicker we begin to go through the revolution that the energy sector in Nigeria needs to get us out of this. It is very well possible, right? And it's amazing what some of the states that are in the vanguard of state electricity markets, what they're doing. Here's an example. I won't name the state, but one of the states that's done this has made provisions not for discos, distribution companies as we know them, but for energy resale companies, which means that you and I can look at a district and say, I have what it takes to sell power to that district and make money. You go to the state electricity regulator, they give you a license, the game is changed. Those are the things that are possible.
Thank you very much.
Did I answer your question?
Yes, certainly you did. A round of applause for our panelists, please. I think at this point we'll have to pause to take questions from the audience, maybe one or two, so we don't lump everything at the end. Do we have any questions from the audience? Wanted us to take like 3. We still have a Q&A later, so we'll just take 3 now and then move it to the Q&A session. Please, your name, where you work, and straight to the point.
Sure. My name is Modibo Sadiq Ibrahim. I'm from the Nigerian Atomic Energy Commission. Of course, my question is not representative of the commission. I wasn't expecting any less from the panel, but I think we need to be pulled in as a commission into these plans. You see, we have a nuclear power plant project. We've selected Gerebu and Itu. It's clearly not going to work. Even by the zones you've put in now, it's out of the picture. But imagine this with me. Let's rescope the project, take the nuclear power plant project on the coast of West Africa, at least on the economic free zones, starting from Lagos all the way to Sierra Leone. And I think this is the place to start these conversations. You are the people to pass this across. And like I said, this isn't the position of the commission. This is my personal opinion. And I would like for you to pull us in or pull me in if you think I'm fit to come into these panels so that we can make the models now. Because if we don't do it, just like my brother said here, we have damn good nuclear engineers in the US, Europe, and Asia who would all have to leave. So I think we need to have these conversations, and it's an appeal to please pull in people like us in the system. Otherwise, the nuclear power program in Africa entirely would die off. There are conversations being had in the World Bank that for the first instance, World Bank would finance a nuclear power program. You're talking about $10 billion. No single African country in sub-Saharan Africa has the credit rating to take that. Or perhaps as a sub-region, we could do that. And I hope I've started a thought in your minds that can continue from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that comment, and a round of applause for the gentleman. So, okay.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Basayo. I work with Next Year. So my question goes to Dio and Franks. For Dio, my question for you is, you mentioned you're doing some work with the Ministry of Finance, your team and the Ministry of Finance team to put together some things for strategic the implementation plan. Yes. My question goes, are the representatives of these beneficiaries, for instance, the M300, 300 million Africans, I'm thinking will prioritize people in local communities and rural environments. Do we have representatives of these beneficiaries in this plan? What I'm not talking about the local government chairmen now. I'm talking about like religious leaders, people that can actually influence this thought. Because from some of the work we've done at Next Year, we've seen that people in the up north, for instance, some of them do not believe that they have to pay for electricity. They think it's their right. I'm thinking if you're making this much investment, the return must come. So are they inclusive in these plans? Then for Frank, you mentioned we are having the possibility of having like subgrades and 4 zones, right? So interestingly, what we're doing in Next Year also is to see if decentralizing the national grid according to geopolitical zones would aid or support the energy access, which is going to solve the electrification crisis. I want to ask, still again, I'm seeing there's a lot of investments to be made. Millions of dollars will have to be put into these things because the technology and the infrastructures are not cheap, and labor is not cheap as well. What are practical and feasible plans, long-lasting plans, or steps we can take to ensure if we decentralize the national grid, is going to give us proper return on investment, is also going to solve the electrification crisis? Let's not be one of these plans that we make and it just falls through and it's just, oh, we have 6 national grids and it's not making any sense. An instance is India. India has 5 national grids, and with that, they're able to generate, I think, over 150 gigawatts of renewable energy. So basically, if you're trying to bring in renewable energy, what feasible steps do we have to take to get this done? Thank you.
Let them answer, then we'll take the last question. So Dio, over to you.
Okay. I think maybe the comment from the
gentleman.
Atomic Energy Agency, right? So it's actually quite strange you say that, because I think we had a meeting with your management, right? And I think it was a good meeting. And I think the reason for the meeting was also trying to understand the plan for the Atomic Energy Agency in terms of where they are in the path of going nuclear and how that fits into the energy mix and the plan for Nigeria. I'll make one comment, is that when you look at the size and cost of nuclear, I'm very happy that you are thinking about it from a regional perspective today. Because even when I look at the fiscal space that we have in the country today, it's actually quite unlikely. For a nuclear plant, we are talking easily $5 to $8 billion, even 10, depending, on the size. But that doesn't mean you can't go nuclear at a certain level. There are small, medium-sized reactors today that potentially you can look at that produce affordable energy, right? So I think we can look at it in different phases, but definitely I think there's a lot of conversations that has gone on. And I think it would be great to continue that conversation, and we certainly intend to do so. In terms of N300 implementation, and we want to provide access. You see, about 86 million Nigerians don't have access, right? Zero. The rest have access, but unreliable access. The M300, we are trying to address reliability, which means, also the last mile grid strengthening. And we also need to address providing access to the 86 million that don't have access. That group of 86 million, a lot of them dwell in rural areas. We already have significant programs from the Ministry of Power through REA that is driving electrification in rural areas. And we've actually seen that it's been significantly successful. And to be honest, what we've actually seen is that rural dwellers actually are more credible than urban dwellers when it comes to payment of electricity to a certain extent. Because, we've done a lot of studies with developers in the rural areas. Rural dwellers pay for their electricity as they consume, and they are actually quite happy to have stable, reliable electricity. And it may surprise most of us here that most mini grids supply electricity higher than the band A tariff. The average mini grid tariff today, even with government capital subsidy, is 290, 320 naira per kilowatt. And what we've seen is that where you include productive use, you're actually able to stimulate economic growth that actually allows rural dwellers to be willing and able to pay for the electricity they consume. But the point you asked is quite critical, that are we including, when you say, religious leaders, and I'll say communities, right? So I think you have to include the communities, and you'll be surprised, communities in rural areas play a big part in any development we do. They play a part in the installation. Some of them are trained to be part of the operations and maintenance team for the development company. Some of them become vendors for selling energy, right, to consumers. Some of them become productive users of energy that we are also bringing in private sector to provide cheap, medium-term loans to some of these individuals to be able to take this equipment for productive use. So in reality, there will be no mini grids in rural areas or interconnected mini grids in rural areas without actually connecting with the community. But I'll take your point from the development of N300 in terms of how do you ensure engagement, especially on the DRE pillar, the distributed renewable energy pillar. How do you bring some of those communities? Because you can't determine the community today, unfortunately. Yeah, there's data, but you can't just predetermine the community. A lot of it is determined by sometimes how close they are to the grid, where the location is, are we looking at an isolated mini grid in a border area? That determines the type of capital subsidy you want to allocate there. If it's an interconnected mini grid, it also changes the structure of the mini grid. But I would think very deeply about how best to get community leaders, sort of involved in the discussion, potentially at an earlier stage. Right, so I think that's a good comment.
Okay, the second question, Frank, for you.
Okay. Just a quick comment on the nuclear energy. In the process of putting together the IRP, it was very wide consultation. Energy Commission of Nigeria was very active all the way, and there was a touch point with the Atomic Energy Agency. The focus of the IRP is actually least cost energy access. Atomic energy of the type you're speaking about, in my head, it is of national strategic importance, right? When the government says for this security reason or the other tactical reason, we must have this, they fund it. It is not justified on a least cost basis. That's why we did not spend time on it, but it does have a place, and the right conversations need to be had. National grid. What we are advocating is not a decentralization in the simple sense. It is a recognition of the vast geography to look at zones of a national grid. These are not independent grids. They are interconnected, but they are in zones, and their resilience is built around zones. In my head, there's also still the possibility, even after you've done the zoning, when we have a large enough collection of private investors, to actually do a super grid that then links all of these zones together, right, in one large national grid. The other reason for the grouping is as we conceive more and more of large grid connected solar plants, we need to think about the resilience of the nature of solar. If there's a cloud cover, everything drops. Now you need something to pick up the load very quickly in the vicinity, and that is best constructed around this zonal grids. Please look at the thinking in the integrated resource plan, because this was modeled, it was done using best-in-class approaches around the world. We believe it is the way to go, and also encourage quicker uptake of large-size solar plants that are grid connected.
Thank you so much for this.
Went on the
Okay.
regional grid. So I totally agree with Frank. I think it's clear for us as well that regional grids probably the best way to go, so that we can also ring fence areas when there's an issue. I think the IRP is clear on it. I think the NISO as well, as part of their work as they settle down, is to develop further studies on really how implementation of a regional grid would work, right? So it just goes beyond the modeling. There's going to be a reality to it, right? In terms of real infrastructure and costs that have to be passed and amortized downstream. And I think this is the reason why I wanted to answer this question, or just make a comment, is electricity infrastructure is actually quite expensive and requires amortization. Whenever we think about doing things, we should not just do things because it looks good to do. We must really consider the economics of driving this investment. Part of the challenge with our grid today, as large as and as inconsistent as it is, that millions of dollars actually has been spent on this grid and continues to be spent on the grid. But I am 100% sure that we will not get the value from the transmission network just because of the way it's structured. And the fact that there's a clear lack of amortization and commercial reality for the transmission company of Nigeria. Even the wheeling charges, when I do a calculation on the wheeling charges, even the wheeling charges allocated today without the TLF, for me, is inconsequential. Because if I were to bring a private sector network into transmission and they wanted to amortize their investment over 25 years by delivering, assuming 200 megawatts an hour. I've already seen the numbers of what their link charges would be with a TLF of 5%. And I see what transmission company of Nigeria's willing charges are. If I was to bring that onto the grid today and bring that level of cost onto it, the downstream that is already challenged would even be more challenged. So my point in all this thing is that, it is very good, but I think we have to approach it in phases and in stages and in a way that we can actually absorb it economically, or else we will find ourselves in a very similar situation down the road where we have infrastructure that the tariff structure cannot absorb. So that's just my comment, but we fully agree that having that regional grid and being able to ring fence different areas from impact of a collapse or whatever issue may have happened in a different area is certainly the way to go.
Thank you so much for your comments. We are racing against time, so we'll move faster. We have one more question over there. We'll have to move yours to the Q&A, sir. So you have to wait. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you to the panelists today. I just have a simple question. We all know that electricity tariffs have gone up. Every one of us is paying more, whether you're in band A, B, C, whatever. Can we please understand exactly how subsidies are, like what are the modalities behind the subsidies that are being put into place? Because we're hearing in the news that subsidies are going to be removed. And it's like, if we're already paying more and everybody's already complaining as to how much they're paying, and we're talking about removal of the subsidies, can we at least understand the implementation process from the government? Who is the government paying exactly? What exactly are they paying for? And how does it exactly benefit the citizens that don't actually get the electricity that they supposedly pay for? Thank you.
Thank you. Dai, I suppose that's for you.
Yeah, so, okay. Well, what's the best way to start from? Okay, let me start from January 2024, right? In January 2024, federal government of Nigeria was paying for 92% of energy consumed in the entire country, which means that consumers of electricity were paying for only 8% of energy consumed. We looked at that scenario and realized that this is quite untenable, and there isn't any way government is going to be able to sustain this level of payment, and they are not paying anyway. Some of customers, which is band A, B, C. By the way, you have the bands have always been there for many years. It's just that in 2023 or in 2024, we actually really then activated the bands by actually moving some to cost reflective and making those customers pay. So if you're not a band A customer, you are actually not paying more for the electricity you're consuming. So I think it's important that we're all aware of that. And, there are different pricing, band B, 66 Naira, band C, I think 60, and then you even have band E that pays 38 Naira or something, but who knows how much electricity is actually supplied downstream. But you have that stratification, right? And the idea of the band A service was to ensure that you had a cost reflective tariff for a certain segment of customers who are no longer being subsidized. So a band A customer is not attracting any subsidy at this point. Now, band A customers represent 15% of the entire customer base in the NESI and consume about 35 to 38% of energy consumed, right? So band A customers are 15% of customers, but consume about 38% of energy, right? So in Nigeria today, the government is still subsidizing, let's say, about 62% of the market. You may ask, then why, all this discussion around removal of subsidy? So the way subsidy works is that government has asked distribution companies not to charge a cost-reflective tariff. Energy companies, like the generation company, the transmission company, they have their cost, which is not being passed down to the distribution segment, which means that for every kilowatt that is supplied to a distribution company, you have a tariff shortfall. A tariff shortfall is the differential between the actual cost of delivering energy and the cost that government allows distribution companies to pay. That is the subsidy. That is the tariff shortfall, which government on a normal basis should be accounting for on a monthly basis. Nobody is saying all customers should pay cost-reflective tariff. If a government decides that they are going to subsidize electricity, one thing they must do is budget for it, cash back the budget, and pay it on time. There is zero benefit for anybody to be involved in the power sector on the generation side today. And you send your invoice, your 100% invoice, and you get paid 35%. In January 2024, these generation companies were sending their invoices and they were being paid 8%. It's just not sustainable. And as you rightly said, we have a 4 trillion debt based on December 2024. The debt as of today is 4.8 trillion because it's a 200 billion shortfall on a monthly basis. So for us, when we have this discussion, it's actually not philosophical. It's actually a reality that if nothing is done in terms of the debt that is being generated in the sector, then I am actually 100% sure that the generation companies will grind to a halt. It is an absolutely sure thing that will happen. Now, there are many reasons that you can give for why you have it. Yes, there are inefficiencies in the value chain. You have distribution companies that have challenges in collecting. Even in addition to their tariff shortfall, they have a market shortfall to NBET as well, which last year was over 100 billion. So you just realize that this is a sector that really has challenges in liquidity. And the question you ask yourself is, if government has gone through a process of privatizing, and they don't have the capital to drive the infrastructure investment, and you expect a private sector company to drive this investment, at some point in time, there has to be a line of sight on return, or else it is impossible to bring in capital that has a rate of return, and you as the investor don't have a clear sight on how you are going to get your return. And that is what we are constantly grappling in. And that's why when you hear government say that, we're going to move to full CRT and we're going to remove subsidies, it is definitely a thought. But of course, in implementing such a policy, we also have to think about who are those that actually truly need subsidy in Nigeria. And I think Frank made a very important point about data. Nigeria is a country of over 220 million people, and we just don't have data. I can tell you, to get data on economic capacity of individuals, something that in a lot of developed countries, you could actually get by states, by province, by area. Nigeria is very difficult to find. Now, who do you provide subsidy to? And what is the best channel of actually providing that subsidy? So we've had a lot of discussions. There are many fancy things we can do. We can do block tariffs, but then you want to do block tariffs in a country that has less than 50% meter penetration. You start to ask yourself, how will this be done effectively? how would you ensure that you could actually monitor, such, improved tariff structures that would allow those that are consuming a certain kilowatt of energy to receive some energy free of charge. And then once you go above that, you start to pay a commercial tariff. So there are lots of things that have to be done. But whatever the situation, we're going to have to bite the bullet as a country. And we're going to have to decide if we really want to have a functional electricity value chain. And that's why government continues to think about what is the best way to manage subsidy, what is the best way to actually gradually reduce subsidy, and what is the best way to also improve the supply of energy as you also reduce the subsidy. Because what you also don't want consistently is that you have an increased cost of electricity, but then you don't get it.
Thank you so much. Please, a hand of applause for our panelists. Frank, you go.
Yeah. Edayo, this is going to be one of those are moments. So one of the ways to look at managing the problem is actually to understand what constitutes the value of the subsidy that people are being charged. And as you know, I have 85% somewhere of the power that we generate is from gas turbines powered by gas. Anybody who knows anything about money in Nigeria knows that anything that is priced in dollars, the cost of it has gone up about 350%. Same thing if you don't get the fake. And what we have inadvertently subjected ourselves to is that same inflation index in our power consumption, because the gas that fuels the generators is priced in dollars and paid in dollars. Is that the wisest way to deal with this problem? I am a huge advocate that gas that is used for domestic power supply should be priced in Naira. That will have some form of mitigating impact on the quantum of the subsidy. The oil industry will not like it.
Yeah.
Right? But that's why we have government, and they can get their relief from other sources. Just my pet peeve.
Thank you so much.
On that topic, I hope you just, I mean, Frank and I have this philosophical discussion all the time. It actually depends on how you look at it, right? Gas is priced in dollars but paid in Naira. When the exchange rate unification happened, one of the things that really happened was that it pushed government subsidy on foreign exchange to real sector. So it means that every sector now has to bear the cost of true foreign exchange impact in their sector. And actually, that's one of the reasons for the ballooning subsidy. We've seen now that we're able to sell crude for Naira with Dangote, with its challenges and issues that have occurred. With crude, there has been significant investment over the years. And we've seen a lot of investment by the IOCs already in crude infrastructure. The problem you have with gas infrastructure is the fact that we don't have significant investment in gas infrastructure. The little investment we have with gas infrastructure is by investors that have borrowed in dollars and need their return to match their payments. Now, if we were sitting in a country that over the last 30 years had invested significantly in gas pipelines, gas processing, it would be easy because you look at the quantum of the supply of production and you can decide that this one should be paid. But what we have, I don't want to call the names of the company because they are also, we are asking them today to even make more investment in gas production. At the moment you start to go down that route, then a lot of their investment requirements will change. So we have to decide as a country as well. When instead of government, so imagine this, imagine instead of government paying 4 trillion in subsidies, they decided to build pipelines for 4 trillion naira to connect to gas processing plants. They can then now decide on that value chain that, you know what, we need to price this in naira because this is for power generation. But the problem that I really have is the fact that government has to invest in infrastructure, government has to provide subsidy. When you put those two things together, Nigeria as a country does not have the physical space. So again, it's very, very difficult for us to make those types of decisions where we have little capacity in gas compared to what we need. If we drive down that route too quickly, you would see a reduction in investment. And if we see that as long as government is ready to step in to drive the gas investment, then I don't have an issue. I'll be happy for gas to be priced in dollars, in naira, and paid in naira. That would be great. But when I see the investment structure that we have on the gas side, it's actually quite unlikely. And that's why I say it's philosophical, because you would sit down with the gas suppliers, except the country is ready to provide some fiscal stimulus to those people. And if they are ready and they have the capacity to, then you can start to find ways to make it happen. But at this point, it's still philosophical. Like, so we can continue to have our discussion around it on a regular basis.
Okay, just to bring up something to what you said right now, the government has actually taken steps with regards to gas infrastructure. And I know this because my organization, we have independent gas power plants that we use to supply electricity. And this program is the Midstream and Downstream Gas Infrastructure Fund. What I've observed so far is it hasn't really been publicized. People do not really understand the scope of financing that supports. And I was just speaking with someone in the office, and he said a lot of companies have been applying to access this funding, but it's mainly on the storage and processing aspect of things. No one has brought any project about building pipeline infrastructure and virtual pipelines also. So I think there needs to be more publicity on that and sensitization, because it looks like majority of the existing gas companies that have applied, my organization inclusive, have just been focused on processing and storage as opposed to the actual pipelines and virtual pipelines. And so as these things, as people get to access this funding and the infrastructure is being built, I'm pretty sure we'll get to that point where we will be charging domestic gas sale in naira. Thank you.
Thank you so much for these rich discussions. Dio, you mentioned that there is need for government to invest in infrastructure and provide subsidy. When you look at most state governments and you read their policies, most of them mention that the government is not willing to provide subsidy. From your opinion, what do you think will be the fate of those electricity markets?
Well, okay. Okay, I'll be very straight and honest. I don't see any state government that can absorb the subsidy. It's just because you can in today's you can look at most even viable states and look at their FAC allocation, their IGR. If you add it together, the subsidy for most, even there are some states that their subsidy bill is higher than their total FAC and IGR in a month. And I'll say for most states, it will be about 60% or 70%. So it the subsidy will be very, very difficult to absorb in a state market, actually impossible. So we need to try to move to cost reflective tariff. But we need to be careful. Cost reflective tariff is reflective of the cost of energy delivery. And this is why, in a lot of the discussions that we have, it's about ensuring least cost energy generation, least cost energy delivery. We are not going to achieve that overnight. But one of the things that I'm sure of, that even if we move towards cost reflective market and we go to higher level of electricity cost, that would also drive investments and would also create the type of market that we're looking for, where we can have 10 gigawatts of solar coming onto the grid. And that has been my messaging, that unless we go cost reflective first, and then bring in cheaper sources of generation, which will then drive down the tariffs. You see, when you talk about Egypt and you talk about a lot of these countries, scale is the biggest driver of cost reduction.
Mm.
And I can tell you that once we drive a cost reflective tariff regime where investors are clear they can recover their costs, you would see cheaper generation coming into the country. I'll give you some examples. The last bidding round in South Africa for solar with battery storage was 4.2 cents. In Egypt, the last set came down to about 3.6 cents. The average tariff in Nigeria is about 7.5 cents. We have on the high end some gas generation at 11.8 cents. And we have on the lower end hydro in Nigeria, which is 4.5 cents. So when I look at that, for me, it's already clear that if we decided to drive a cost reflective tariff where investors are clear that they can recover their investments, you would see that within a 5-year period, new generation will come on stream. And you also realize that 60% of our generation is actually inefficient and old, right? So, some of these plants are 25 years old, and we know how new technology brings in better efficiency. But it's very difficult to convince anybody today to bring in significant investments on generation when they are now going to be stuck with getting paid 38% of their energy bill. So that's why, we're in this quagmire, right? But we have to figure out as a country that, look, if we do pay the right price for electricity, I guarantee that in a 5-year period, it will come down because you will get 2 gigawatts, 3 gigawatts of energy, new energy coming onto the grid at between 4.5 and 5 cents. And that would already mean that you are able to take out 30, 40% of your current energy cost. So again, and then you will also be able to drive better efficiency at disco level, reducing ATC and C losses, reducing TLF on transmission line, and then we get this efficiency. But it's very, very difficult to also get that investment if we are not going to get a CRT. So that's why I want to see some examples in the state market. You have a smaller area, you have a bit of a more, controlled area. Can you bring in efficient generation into that area? Can you strengthen the distribution network in that area? Then what is the CRT? Because people talk about CRT as if it's an abstract thing. CRT reflects the cost of the infrastructure you bring in.
Yeah.
And until we decide to start doing things the right way, where we have efficient procurement across the value chain that is driving least cost delivery, then it's very, very difficult that your CRT won't be high. So I think these are the things that as a country we must consider to be able to achieve the right level of CI. So CIT in itself is not a bad thing. It's just a reflection of your cost upstream. So the quicker we start becoming more efficient in what we do, the quicker our CRT comes down. And the quicker we start focusing on scale, the quicker our energy costs will come down.
Wow. Please, a round of applause for our panel. So, Ezuma, this question is for you. What innovative models can Nigeria employ to attract investments in diversifying our energy mix?
Okay, thank you. I'll start with the results-based finance for energy access solutions. And this is key to ensure that funding is being used for what it was given. And then I would also, the model my organization operates is the energy as a service for industrial clusters. And that just has to do with supplying electricity to willing customers at a cost-reflective tariff. And in most cases, we tend to approach these industrial clusters who rely mostly on diesel, because obviously the grid is not reliable in terms of the availability and the quality, so to speak. And so we step into those places, offer them a cost-reflective tariff that's still ultimately less expensive than what they currently spend. And like Dio said, it also has to do with scale, because we cannot set up a plant for someone who consumes, say, less than 1 megawatt. That way, we are just we are running a charity, basically. And so I would also say we should introduce green asset-backed securities like the green bond to finance the expansion of our transmission and distribution network. So these are just some of the, I don't know if I'll call them innovative methods, because they are just very clear, easy to adopt.
Okay, as a follow-up question,
yeah.
If you had the mandate to rewrite the investment narrative for Nigeria's energy sector, what bold headlines would you use? And what are the 3 actions that you would follow?
So I'm not big on bold headlines or anything like that. But what I would just say is I would break down my approach into phases. I would have a short term, I'll have the medium and the long term. The short term, obviously, focus maybe on energy access to rural communities who don't have. And so that's on a smaller scale. And then in the medium term, say if we were doing 500 megawatts in the short term, we'll do 5 gigawatts in the medium term to introduce to like households and willing customers. And in the long term, I would focus on expanding the energy as a service model, where I would just supply electricity to willing customers who consume large amounts, like the industrial clusters and whatnots, at a cost-reflective tariff. So that's just what I would do. Break it down to 3 phases. Start small and have like a smart scaling. That's my actionable steps. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that response. Then to Frank, we are racing against time, so I would kindly plead that we reduce maybe 1 minute for each of the questions that would come soon. So Frank, how is Nigeria balancing grid reliability and renewable energy integration in its electricity planning? Are there ways that government can improve on what we already have?
Yes, there are ways, and I spoke to this earlier, right? It's build the capacity. and then look at strengthening the grids and segments that will allow stepwise increase in solar energy, primarily that is going onto the grid. In addition, Nigeria has large numbers of small rivers that can power run-of-the-river hydros and give you, 500 kilowatts here and there. Those are the starting steps that will then embolden people to take more substantial steps.
Okay. Thank you so much. Then, Dio, recently the news broke that the government is trying to ban solar importation. If this is done, do you think it would affect the renewable energy goals in the national electricity policy?
Okay, so maybe I'll start with just from Mr. President's perspective.
Okay.
Right? That, at the last FEC, Mr. President gave an executive order on patronizing local, right? And just like America first, Nigeria first strategy, right? So from an economic point, we're in a point where we also have to ensure that we are buying local. One of the challenges that I also see within the value chain is we import almost everything we consume. So when we talk about the impact of foreign exchange, right, and we're talking about gas priced in dollars, you should also remember that every other thing in the value chain, from your towel in Nigeria, we import towels. In Nigeria, I still see cables being imported where you have cable manufacturers in Nigeria. In Nigeria, we import transformers. In Nigeria, we import switchgear. In Nigeria, we import breakers. The only thing we don't import today, thank God, is cement when you are actually, putting together a project. But outside of construction, everything else is imported. So, of course, the idea is not an immediate ban on solar equipment or energy value chain equipment. The idea is to go through a process of import substitution where we're able to gradually build capacity locally, and government agencies are then directed also to patronize local. I think this will encourage local economy. I think this would encourage increased employment and increased salary capacity, because part of Nigeria's challenge is we are not growing fast enough, right? So we have a GDP that is 3.5% or 3.3%, where potentially we need to be at 5 to 6%. How do you actually stimulate more economic growth in this country? One of it is to ensure that what we're importing, we are trying as much to buy local. But we must also face the reality that, do you have the ability to produce at a competitive price? Because from an economics point of view, there's competitive advantage, there's comparative advantage. You have to ask yourself, you cannot produce solar panel. Let me tell you, you cannot produce solar panels anywhere in the world as cheap as they do in China. In fact, most Chinese solar companies will deliver solar panels to you in Nigeria, including duties and transportation, lower than you can produce it here. So again, I think we just have to have a balance in how we drive the Nigeria First strategy, but it's very critical that we direct government agencies to also support procurement from local manufacturers of equipment.
Thank you so much. A round of applause for our panelists. And also a round of applause for yourselves. So now it's time for our Q&A. Can we get questions from the audience? There are some people we couldn't take their questions earlier.
Hello. Yeah, sorry. Good evening. My name is Shibumi Gbajimo. I work in AEDC. I'm not speaking on behalf of AEDC. I'm speaking on behalf of, as a professional in the power sector and a patriotic Nigerian who believes in the success of the power sector. First of all, I'd like to commend Mr. Dayo and Mr. Duze for putting together a very solid policy document. I know it took a lot of hard work, and by the grace of God, we know it will succeed. But you see, the problem with Nigeria, as you all know, is that we have good ideas, we have great ideas, but the problem is implementation. You know that even in the power sector, what has been the setbacks is that there's no regulatory certainty. There are always a lot of policy flip-flops. That's why I'm just asking that what would make this policy implementation, well, how can we guarantee that it's going to be implemented and it's going to be effective? Now, my second question, and Mr. Dyer, I've really been feeling your points on investment and cost-reflective tariff. Now, you don't have to answer which states, but this is just just seeking your opinion. Do you think some states are rushing into this state electricity market thing that, you know, as people that worked in the power sector, sometimes we just evaluated that. Some of these states, do they know what they are getting into? Because on the national level, there are a lot of, as you said, a lot of challenges. Now, the states are now trying to embrace their own power sector. Things like you said, cost-reflective tariff. Can you work in some states? You know, so those are just my two questions. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Gabriel. I work with Niger Delta Power Holding Company. Actually, the last speaker took the bullet out of my mouth. But I just want to say one or two things to add value to his concern so that the panelists can address them. And let me use this opportunity to also commend Frank, who has been very dogged in assisting this nation in coming up with a policy that we guarantee sustainable energy. Frank, I met you over 15 years ago in NEC, and you are still here doing this work. And I want to commend Dayo too. I can see some traction coming from the ministry. 4 or so years ago, I was where you are. And I know that it's not easy just by policy to change the sector. We had a minister who said a government that cannot solve power problem in 6 months is not a serious government. But before he left, he also said only a magician can solve the electricity problem of the country. Now, the same concern expressed my brother. What is the guarantee that this one, will take us to where we hope to be in the quickest, shortest, possible time? And Dayo, you said something very fundamental, but it was very tangential also. When you said you came in and you found this policy in the works, you could have changed it if you wanted to. So what is the hope that this new policy that has been received with so much enthusiasm, including me, is going to have an implementation path that will not be subject to these changes that change in and government also bring about? Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Chris Okura. I work for an EPC known as Unistar Intelligent PLC. When you spoke earlier, you mentioned about quite some misalignments in the energy value chain in Nigeria. And one of them I want to bring to light is the challenge the GECOs are having. GECOs in terms of funding, GenCos will have to source gas at 30 days, and then they have to wait for 90 days to receive payment from NBET. So what you see is a situation where you see the GenCos either are sourcing for who to export to direct instead of sending it to the grid, or a situation where a lot of their capacities are left idle instead of employing it and then not getting paid. So my question is, or the area I'm looking at is, what is the government doing in terms of trying to make sure that the PPAs entered into by NBET and these GenCos are workable? Right now, it's not workable. And remember, as Frank mentioned earlier, a lot of PPAs, the solar companies entered into NBET failed. Thank you.
The last question, please. One more question. One more question.
Good evening, everybody. I first want to say thank you to the speakers that have spoken. It's been an enlightening conversation. My name is Wangu Sefmi. I'm a project design engineer at Sea Solar Energy Limited. So thank you, Mr. Adedayo, for what you mentioned about the policy to ban panels. I remember when I saw that news, and then I was just thinking to myself that before doing something, isn't it better to ensure that there's a structure in place that causes investments in manufacturing of local solar panels? Because I think it's possible to try to want to achieve something, then at the opposite, now have disadvantage, such as you now have low quality panels. There's a hike in panels that are already in place, and it's almost like the electrification that we're now trying to achieve as a nation now starts to gradually decline. So that's my question and then my thought process.
Thank you. So who goes first? Dio.
Some that I believe I can combine in terms of policy implementation. So I think I should be able to answer that. So in terms of policy implementation and what's going to be different. So when we started the policy process, one of the things that became very clear to me is that we could have easily sat down, we started working with the UK NIEP team early, and we could have easily decided to just sit down and work with that team alone. But for me, it was also very, very clear that to ensure stakeholder buy-in, it's better to involve as many stakeholders as possible. But you also know that maybe when you have too many cooks, you also have a challenge. So it was also for me to be able to manage the stakeholders. So one of the focus for me was bringing in other development partners. So we had UK NIEP, we had the World Bank, we had AFDB, we had NPSP. So we had quite a few. So we had quite a few different views. We had, and that's why it took a long time, because for every chapter that you're looking at, we had people with different views. And for me, that was very, very important, because what I've realized is that when people are not involved, the perception is that that document is not good. And it's perception that kills policy in Nigeria. And I have to be honest with you, a lot of policy documents in Nigeria sometimes are just given to a consultant, go and write it and bring it to the ministry, and minister takes it to effect. To be honest, this was not our process. The Honorable Minister of Power spent multiple hours at night. You can check, you can ask Frank, where we were involved in actually discussions on the policy and what his own views were. Because what he told me was that, I don't want a policy that I have not contributed into. And sometimes when we look back and we look at some of the pictures we've taken, we see ourselves sitting down where we're discussing at night really on this policy. And that's why I'm convinced. I'm convinced on this policy because we had at least 6 to 7 partners that worked on it with us. And a lot of these partners, where they are not involved, they talk negatively about policy. So, and that's what I've seen in Nigeria. And they come to me, you're discussing about a certain sector and they'll tell you about why this is not working. When you look at it, they'll tell you that it's because it was just so and so that was involved. And perception and policy go together. Once you have a negative perception, then there's already a feeling that this policy is not going to work. So first of all is ensuring good involvement of stakeholders. And that was exactly the point in not developing the SIP with the policy, because it would have been very easy. Actually, it would be less stressful for me and for everybody involved if we just wrote everything together. But my feeling was that I wanted to get as much critique as possible on the policy in the evaluation stage, that let's get an approved policy and write an implementation plan for it. And don't forget, implementation requires different sets of stakeholders as well. And that's what we're going to do. That in the implementation plan, we're going to involve, of course, the set of stakeholders that were involved in drafting the policy. But then we also have to look at implementation agencies and those who would have to take the policy and drive it as part of their daily routine. Oftentimes, implementation agencies don't even know that the policy is being written. They have no idea. So, for example, if we looked at capacity development and we wanted to work with our agency in power, which is NAPTIN, NAPTIN could easily have its own direction. They have not been, and it happens all the time. They have not been involved in the policy. So when they are doing their own thing, they are just running their race based on what the DG or the CEO wants to do. But when you then involve them in the implementation plan, you take their ideas as well into cognizance, so that when they are implementing, they are actually driving the outcome you want from the policy and coming out of their institution. So for me, again, like I mentioned earlier, stakeholder involvement is very, very critical in driving implementation. State markets, look, I don't want to say state markets cannot work, because I actually believe that it can work. But can it work in all markets? You have to ask yourself that question. You have markets that want to have a regulatory autonomy that has to be paid by an independent market. I've seen state laws that think the regulator is a commissioner of states, or the commissioner of states can be the regulator when there's no regulator. It's like saying that the Minister of Power should also be the chairman of NEC. And in case there is no chairman of NEC, so that the minister is also policy and regulator of the market. So you can imagine some of these type of anomalies. But nevertheless, my feeling is the state market should have always been the regulator of distribution. It is very difficult to regulate a distribution segment from far away. The closer you are to the market, the easier it is to regulate. But what we have to do is that this will take some time. There will be some markets that will be able to build capacity to regulate their distribution segment. And once distribution segment also starts to become more efficient, I think some state markets will succeed. I believe that there will be amendments to the Electricity Act as we go on in the future. And I believe that it will give rise to regional markets. I think in the medium term, you would find, because the act does not actually allow for a regional market, but I do believe that there will be amendments and eventually a regional market potentially that you can then bring a few markets together where you can then have scale. Because buying 200 megawatts for your states, you're not going to get a discount. But buying 1,000 megawatts for 3 states combined, you can negotiate a better price and get a least cost supply. So I think that is going to happen over time in a natural way. But that's not the case today. Guarantees of current policy. In life, there are no guarantees actually, but we just have to try to put a pathway towards doing the right thing. Like I said, when Frank presented the IRP, I could have read it and came up with the conclusion that this government does not want this IRP and we're going to commission somebody else. But for me, it's a waste of resources and, you know, resource allocation and understanding where the work is coming from, for me, is pertinent and critical. And after reading it and understanding where the document was going, my advice to the Honorable Minister was that, for me, this is a good document. And starting all over again would mean needing another 2 years to be able to complete a similar document. So a lot of governments or administrations need to decide what they want to achieve. If your achievement is about creating documents, then you can cancel all the documents that have come before you and start new ones. But if you want to focus on implementation, it's better you look at what's on ground, make some changes that you believe are important for you, and then you run with it. And I believe that that's what this government is focusing on. And there are quite a few projects that we've actually taken on from previous administrations that, you know, different people have said, you know, why don't you kill this? But I think when you look at the project in itself, you have to find the merits. And when you find the merits, then you go ahead with it. Misalignment. I think for me that's the, so when you, I think you said you've known Frank for 15 years in the sector. So whenever I hear that, I always say that. So all the problems from 15 years ago are also on Frank's lap, you know. So for being an advisor in the sector for that long, but you know, I'm just kidding. But so misalignment. There's significant misalignment, I must say, and I think that's where I see the major issues. I don't see synergies across the value chain. I see risks put to the wrong player, right? And once you have that, then that risk is wrongly priced. And that's what we're seeing in sort of the inefficiencies that are driving across the sector. So when you say the PPA at MBET is untenable, obviously it's untenable. Market is not paying, government is not paying. So in fact, wherever you put that PPA, it's not going to work. You know, we've said, okay, we'll move it, we'll novate it to NISO. It's going to come because the market operator is now there, it will be built up, but without capital, right? Either coming from the market or coming from government, you still have the same problem. So those structural issues that we see in the market must be fixed. There is no market that can survive if 70% of energy is not paid by the users. If you, as a generating company today, are sure of 70% of your invoice every month, you are running. You can then start worrying about your 30% from government, even if it's delayed 1 month or 2 months, you can survive. But to have a situation that is the opposite is actually untenable. So wherever we put the PPAs today, I don't think it makes a difference. What we have to do is to fix the structural issues and then move the PPAs to the best bearer of risk, which in this case should be the market operator and not NBET when NBET sunsets, right? So I think, yeah, I think for me, those are all the questions that I had. I don't know if Frank wants to also add some answers to some of those questions. Thanks.
Yeah, just a few perspectives. I take no personal credit for any of the things that we've been done. It's always been done by teams, and they were paid for by somebody with an interest in seeing, by an entity, in this case, FCDO, with an interest in improvements in the sector. So just done our bit. PPAs, I'll just say something in there, and I won't dwell on it. A year and a half ago, NIRP had a target to achieve, I think it was 2 megawatts, direct PPAs between GENCOs and DISCOs. That failed. It didn't achieve the target. Why? If GENCOs were really upset and disturbed by non-payment from NBET, why didn't they move? There's some comfort in there. And that's where I see the benefit of state markets. There's no state market that can carry the risk associated with PPAs. Therefore, for any PPA to be signed, it's got to be between a GENCO and an off-taker who has customers. GENCOs have got to learn. You don't sign PPAs for 10 megawatts. You sign PPAs for a lot less when you have a line of sight to the customer. If it means you reduce your generation for a while, that's what you do. Yeah. NBET, as long as NBET is there, all of these inefficiencies will remain in the system. And any entity, it's my biased view, that you put there in place of NBET will carry the same inefficiencies. So you put the risk where the responsibility actually lies. And that's my hope. Because no state is able to carry the burden, people are going to come up in the states that will expose themselves just to enough risk that they can manage, and things will start working, and slowly there'll be scale. That's the way that I see out of this. We should be careful not to design protections for malintent. Managing transition is a big problem in Nigeria. It's been the bane of considered progress. I don't have what the answer is, but you know, having people, well, embedding change before political transition happens is important. But where you don't embed the change, having entities that are able to shepherd transition, ideally that should also be a function of government, to have, you know, transition management committees. Some things, governments come and go, governance remains. Yeah, we have to find a way of doing that. It's theoretical, but we have to find the answer. And finally, I have a lot of hope in state electricity markets. Are we going to have 36 markets? Maybe not. And definitely not in one day. What we have tried to do at UK NIEP is we did an analysis, picked only three states to work with, where one, there was political drive from the executive. There were elements, or there are elements in the state to support what we're trying to do. And by our assessment, you have the key ingredients that can come together to do this. And I can say we are working with Oyo State, Akwa Ibom State, and Enugu State. And already what we're doing, having spent about 3 months with the states, as we speak, we are running workshops across the country for the other 33 states that are not in the population, simply to say, this is a way you could approach this. But I think for the next 5 years, you will still see states that are on the journey. But I do see state electricity markets as one of the surest ways of getting us out of the inefficiencies of large national utilities that have no feel for what it is on the ground in terms of the services that they are providing. Also, you bring regulation very close to the population. And by the way, that comes with its challenges. Consider this. All of the regulatory skills we have today have been created in Abuja around NIRP. Where are you going to find the people that will manage 36 state electricity regulators? Yet it must be done.
That's brilliant. Please, a hand of applause for our audience. We have lots of questions online, but unfortunately, we will not be able to take them. We would reply them via emails. And for some of you that still have questions, during the networking session, you can meet the panelists one-on-one and possibly ask your questions. So before I conclude and before we wrap up this session, I would like to use 1 minute to conduct one experiment. I heard or I saw that psychologists said that in every panel session, that the only thing the audience understands is what was said in the beginning and what was said at the end. So I want to try that theory out. It's actually called recency bias and primacy bias. You can check it out. So can one person in the audience tell us the key takeaways from this event, especially what we discussed at the middle of the event? Who's going first? Just one person in one sentence. Don't break my heart. The psychologists cannot be right. Who's going? Okay.
What I remember in the middle of it is Mr. Dio was pointing fingers at me when he was making reference to discos, and I felt triggered.
Please, a hand of applause for him. All right, thank you so much. You have been amazing. Thank you to our audience and to our amazing panelists. Let me just go through the highlights of the event. First of all, Mr. Dio made us understand what exactly is an integrated resource plan. And he said it's a technical document and it contains the energy demand, energy mix, how this energy will be gotten and where it would be supplied to. Then for the integrated electricity policy, he said it contains frameworks, strategies on how to deploy or how to ensure that universal access is achieved. So moving on to the implementation plans, Mr. Dio in particular said that it's very important to get the buy-in of the stakeholders because the government by themselves cannot guarantee electricity. We need the buy-in of our stakeholders. And he mentioned that we should always engage the stakeholders in the value chain. And it's not what the government, like I said, can do by themselves. And on the strategies for achieving energy access, Ezuma mentioned innovative financing. He mentioned result-based finance. He mentioned green bonds. And most importantly, what I want us to take home is the use of data. All the panelists mentioned that data is very important and we shouldn't make decisions based on maybe emotions, but every decision we make in the sector should be based on data. Thank you so much to our amazing panelists. You were brilliant. We had insightful discussions, and I personally learned a lot. And to the audience, thank you so much. You were very engaging, brilliant audience. It was fun moderating this session. And to the organizers, thank you so much for having us. And I will hand over to them for the organizers for the closing remark. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm sure we really enjoyed the session. We have refreshments at the back and do have a lovely trip back to your houses. Thank you.